And welcome back to this morning, 6:33. So we completely messed around for a segment talking about Halloween. I guess we'll talk about real stuff now. Darn it. It's all right. It's all good. It's all good. The National Center for Health Statistics' latest annual report dropped on Wednesday morning, reporting that life expectancy for American men continues to slide. And this is amid a spike in deaths of despair.
Whoa.
Yeah. Deaths of despair. It's terrible.
So define that.
Well, just basically people are just kind of, you just kind of give up at a point and say, okay, I'm out of here.
Okay.
So, it's just, but it is interesting because, we are, we talk about, strongest economy ever, right? We got the strongest economy ever. Everything's fine, right? Record low unemployment, record low jobless claims. Wages are on the rise. I mean, you listen to the media headlines, you have all this, good news about the economy. It's great. But yet you've got a majority of Americans, 80% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And of course, a lot of seniors, right? Individuals over the age of 62 we have a record number of those individuals. And even over the age of 75 now, we have a record number of individuals still in the labor force working, right? So you can understand as you move later into retirement, it gets much more difficult to, kind of make ends meet and things like this. So, and this is why you've got to be a little careful when you look at statistics. Talking, for instance, one of the statistics thrown about a bunch is that we have the lowest labor force participation rate, for Hispanics and blacks in the country right now. So it's obviously the economy is doing well. It's not really that way because it's simply a function of all the people that drop out of the labor force that we no longer count. So if you're simply not working a full-time job and over a period of time, you simply we just assume that the government does. They just assume that you just don't want to work, so we just don't count you anymore. You're not part of the active labor force, so you're just excluded. So you get these kind of machinations to the statistics that make things look actually a lot better than they are. But in reality, you've got about 95 to 98 million people sitting outside the labor force. Now, that's significant considering that there's only 330 million Americans, roughly, in America, and you've got almost a third of them that we just don't count as part of the labor force. And no, that's not because they just all retired, because financially they can't retire. Yeah. And so it's not surprising that you're seeing a lot of, and it's not, and this is what you see is like during the Depression, you saw a big spike in deaths due to emotional distress and financial despair, et cetera. Same process during the Depression. So and it's interesting that, here we are a decade into an economic cycle and we're seeing life expectancy for men declining amid a spike in deaths of despair.
Yeah, which typically you would think would be the opposite if the market and the economy were really that strong overall. If you look at those underlying numbers that we talk about all the time, that 62% of Americans who are retired rely on Social Security for more than half their retirement income. That average check's $1,400. We know that 4 in 10 people can't meet a $400 expense without going into credit cards or getting funds from family members. That's all stressful. That's right. And not to mention, like we talked about last week, home prices have still gone up. And I mean, how do you make these ends meet? It's got to be difficult, right? If you look at, and then you look at what the average 65-year-old has saved. It's 192 to 195,000, depending on which study you look at.
Right.
And then $250,000 Fidelity's new study is $280,000 just for healthcare in retirement for a couple of 65.
Right. And that's why, but look, and this is why this is very important that, when people are getting to the process of starting to think about Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security and these type of things, that, they make the right decisions, because you can wind up leaving a lot of money on the table if you don't make if you try to claim it too early, or you're worried about certain issues, and so you can make a financial decision that can actually impair you longer term.
Well, I think what we're trying to do as well is try to show people that being a financial advisor or planner goes well beyond just money management. In the fact that there's lots of ways. It's not just how you can protect money in the markets or make money in different environments. It's how you keep more money in your pocket. And making those smart decisions, kind of taking that emotion out of it, I think it's crucial because we get so wrapped up in all these stats. And we do it as well. I mean, I just bantered off a handful, and we could keep going. That it's so easy to say, oh my gosh, this is terrible. We've got to go and do this now. We need to collect this money, or we need to go ahead and file in this way. And many times we find that to be the wrong thing to do.
Right.
And so in these environments where, they have been living longer up until now, I guess, deaths of despair are rising, which that's troublesome because we've had this 10-year bull market cycle. We've had all these numbers that we continue to get, but like you said, labor participation rate is going up for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the things that part of this also too is the lack of health care in a lot of ways. I mean, there's a not so unfamiliar tone that America is one of the most obese countries in the world, right? So our eating habits aren't great, our exercise habits are terrible. And if you go to other countries, people want to point to countries like Spain and France and other countries where their health is actually better, but their diet is a lot healthier. They walk a lot. They walk everywhere. There's a lot of exercise in the family, and they're not sitting in front of Netflix or a television or whatever it is for hours on end, binge watching some television show. Right? They're actually outside doing things, and so it's a cultural issue as well. So, but the reason this is important is that life expectancy is falling, and at the same time life expectancy is falling, the birth rate in America has slowed down to basically some of the lowest levels in 40 years. And in fact, young millennials and Gen Zers are not having sex, and that's, I don't know if that's a function of just society or the lack of economically viable partners or whatever it is. But, that has economic ramifications long term because you need a birth rate that will support economic growth, and especially as you have more and more retirees moving into retirement that are dependent on people paying into Social Security so you can get your check. You've got less people coming up to actually pay into that. So demographics are something that's extremely important to the long-term survivability of an economy. And without good demographic growth, you have to either increase your birth rate or resort to higher levels of immigration. And those are two things that have to be addressed, especially in a country the size of America with 300 million plus people. Birth rates are extremely important, especially when you're running $1 trillion deficit. Birth rates are important as well as immigration.
See, I'm like the young curmudgeon when it comes to all I think of is well, these darn kids, get off that social media. Because it's unfortunate. I've sat on a handful of advisory committees and especially with helping younger people, one of the biggest constraints is their ability to communicate. Yeah. Face-to-face verbal communication. And unfortunately, it's continued to decline. And I talk to professors and teachers a lot, and they say, that's one of the bigger problems is actually used to be that we didn't have these issues. And now, I guess you have all these apps to meet people, but how far does that go?
Well, no, it's an interesting point you bring up because, so let me give you a stat here. This is from the report. Over the same 10-year period, last 10 years, right? So 2009 to 2019. Over the same 10-year period, suicide rates increased 24% to 14 deaths per 100,000. That was up from 11.3%. So they went up they doubled, right, in 10 years. The rise has been so rapid and so shocking that in 2017, suicide became the second leading cause of death behind accidents for young age groups, 10 to 14, 15 to 19, and 20 to 24, with younger males particularly the most impacted. Now, what happened 10 years ago in particular that we're thinking about today? Now, look, we have laws, right? You can't drink until you're 21, right? Why? Because if young people drink, they're not responsible, and they drive and they get in car wrecks and they kill other people, etc. We don't allow people to buy cigarettes because it's not good for them. Right. So we say when you're an adult and you can make your own choices and make intelligent choices, supposedly, you can have access to these things that aren't good for you. We're telling you they're not good for you, but we're going to limit you and your access. Now, what happened 10 years ago in particular that might have led to an increase in suicide rates?
Social media?
Bingo. Yeah, absolutely right. Instagram, social media, Facebook, all that 10 years ago. And it's interesting because nobody's sitting around, nobody's talking about now. You've got this rapid rise in suicide among children. Why? Because they're shut off. They see, all this other stuff on social media that they don't have, the life of the Joneses. And of course, what's also picked up over the course of the last decade, mass shootings. So all of a sudden, we're not looking at social media going, maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't allow our kids to have access to that until maybe they're old enough to understand exactly what's going on and they've got the maturity to handle that.
30, 35.
Look, maybe even 21. But the point is that, we've got something going on here with social media that we're ignoring that's leading to increased rates of suicide of our children. And yet nobody in Congress or anywhere else is talking about, hey, maybe we should think about some restrictions on social media.
I think it does spark a lot of mental health issues. We could really go down this rabbit hole, but it does have a lot of negative connotations.
Yeah.
You can get daily real investment news you can use, delivered at the speed of the internet. Sign up for Lance's newsletter now at realinvestmentadvice.com.